The mid-1970s were an optimistic time for British transport. We got the Triumph TR7 and Rover SD1, the Intercity 125 took us across the country at 125 miles an hour, and the thunderous Concorde took us over Mach 2. Britain was proving it could still do amazing engineering. Then there was the Lotus Esprit, turning heads with its crisp folded lines and supercar styling. By using a tiny engine, it would go on to have the largest power output per litre of any car. And it would clean up so effectively in American motor racing that it was effectively banned by the competition. It's been a Bond car twice in its amazing 28-year-long production run, and Lotus keeps tantalising us with glimpses of what it will be in the future. This is the Lotus Esprit story. Lotus was founded by Colin Chapman. In fact, many would argue that Lotus was Colin Chapman. His first hit car was the iconic Lotus 7, launched in 1957. Chapman realised that for cars to be fast, they had to be light, and the 7 was stripped of all weight to produce a car that went fast even with a small engine. It's still sold today as the Caterham 7. Exploiting a tax loophole, the cars were sold as kit cars, that is a car you build yourself. Lotus asked the government what constituted a kit car, and the answer was 2 or more pieces. So they sold you a fully built car, then they sold you a fully built engine, and the dealer then put them together. These cars were only sold to die-hard enthusiasts who didn't mind getting wet when it rained. Lotus wanted to move into the mainstream car market, so produced the Lotus Elite in 1957, following it up with the Elan in 1962. This was the first car to use Lotus's backbone chassis, with a light fiberglass body for maximum strength and minimum weight. In 1969, Tony Rudd joined Lotus from Formula One racing team BRM. A year later, he greenlit 2 new car projects, the M50 and M70. The M50 would be launched as the Lotus Elite in 1974. The M70 was to be a successor to the awkward-looking and cramped Lotus Europa. The project got started in 1971 when Colin Chapman met up with car designer Giorgetto Giugiaro from the Ital Design Studio. He'd designed cars such as the Maserati Ghibli, Ferrari 250 GT and Mazda Familia, but since then has designed such diverse things as the Seiko Speedmaster and the Beretta CX-4 Storm submachine gun. By this time, Lotus had won 4 of its 7 Formula One World Championships and wanted to move away from their kit car image and into Ferrari's supercar territory. They'd seen Giugiaro's Maserati Boomerang concept and were wowed by its futuristic styling. Work began in mid-1971 with an aerodynamic test of the 1/4 scale mock-up. Colin Chapman was unimpressed with the results and cancelled the project, but Giugiaro pressed on regardless, building a full-size mock-up using a modified Lotus Europa chassis. The prototype, dubbed the Silver Car, was shown in 1972 next to the Maserati Boomerang prototype and convinced Lotus to proceed with the car. In private, Giugiaro was already calling it the Esprit. Reaction to the car was so good, the team pressed on to build a second prototype dubbed the Red Car. This would be a full running prototype using a modified chassis from the Lotus Elan. That backbone chassis cut right through the car, meaning the fuel tank had to be split between 2 compartments. Lotus used this as a feature and put fuel caps on either side of the car. As they were connected with a pipe, you could fill the car from either side. That backbone chassis also meant the handbrake had to be placed next to the driver's door, making entry and exit a little awkward, even though the handle could be retracted. The Esprit was launched at the Paris Motor Show in October 1975, launched early to time with the launch of the Lotus Elite, and to ensure customers knew that the Esprit was really, truly on its way despite the delays caused by Lotus's financial issues. The mechanical design wasn't yet done, and it took until June the following year until it was released. Although it looked like an exotic mid-engine supercar, that engine was only a 4-cylinder 2-litre that looked like it belonged in a family saloon. If you believed Lotus's claims, the car had a 0 to 60 time of 6.8 seconds and a top speed of 138 miles an hour, but the truth was a more humdrum 8 seconds and 124 miles an hour. For a car making such bold claims on the outside, that wasn't impressive. It didn't provide the deep, throaty V8 supercar sound, and with the lack of soundproofing, that whiny 4-cylinder sound was all too apparent. But it was light, weighing in at less than 1,000 kilograms or just over 1 US ton. Door handles came from the Morris Marina, gearbox from the Citroën SM, rear lights from the Fiat X19, door mirrors from the Citroën CX, and front suspension from the Vauxhall Cavalier. Though the Citroën SM production ended in 1975, the gearbox was still available until the late 1980s. Lotus was a small company and needed to borrow parts from other cars so they could focus on what they did best, making great handling cars that went fast. The critics loved the handling and steering but found it underpowered. The engine had to be mounted slightly to one side, which meant the weight balance wasn't quite equal, but car reviewers didn't seem to notice. Maybe that's because the weight of the driver offset it? The interior was cramped with that large backbone chassis intruding between the driver and the passenger. Taller drivers had a challenge fitting into the car, and there was little room to store much luggage. The lack of power and refinement cost Lotus. As they pushed to move up market, they couldn't compete with the supercar big boys. In 1977, Lotus converted the Esprit into a submarine. Well, okay, they didn't, but James Bond Rover tricked out White Esprit in the film The Spy Who Loved Me, that dives off a pier and turns into a submarine that then shoots a missile out of the roof to shoot down an enemy helicopter. After that, who wouldn't choose an Esprit over an Aston Martin? Lotus attempted to address some of the criticisms with the Series 2 Esprit in 1978, but it was only a small step. The outside got a few changes, although the rear tail lights were now borrowed from the Rover SD1. The interior was tweaked with a digital clock, new instrument cluster, and reworked wider seats. Air conditioning was now an option, but was a little asthmatic for Californian tastes. The engine was tweaked and top speed increased slightly to 130 miles an hour, but acceleration was unchanged. After Lotus's 7th Formula One Constructors' victory in 1978, they presented Esprits to their two drivers, Ronnie Peterson and new Formula One champion Mario Andretti. Lotus realised they needed to do something with that underpowered aluminium 2-litre engine. They debuted a 2.2-litre variant in the 1978 Lotus Talbot Sunbeam and added it to the Esprit as a stopgap measure in 1980. But it was only when the Series 3 Esprit Turbo launched in 1981 that it created a winning package. The 2.2-litre engine with turbo power moved the top speed from 130 miles an hour to over 150, and 0 to 60 time was a mere 6.1 seconds. The car was now officially a supercar. It launched with a special Essex edition promoting Lotus's Formula One sponsor, but soon regular versions were offered to customers. And it's not just the engine that changed. The brakes and clutch were uprated, the interior space for passengers just got a tad better, and the overall quality of the vehicles increased, partly down to making the car simpler to manufacture. That backbone chassis was modified, not just for the new suspension, but to make more space in the engine bay. What could that be for? For now, Lotus wasn't saying. The car got a restyling with a Giugiaro-designed body kit. Instead of glass over the engine, there was now a black louvered panel to help dissipate heat. And the new car was truly needed. Lotus was lurching from one financial crisis to another, selling only 383 cars in 1980, partly because of the terrible exchange rate with the US dollar. In fact, US sales had been good in the late 1970s, and the James Bond film definitely helped, but one bad distributor after another stymied US sales. James Bond was back in the Lotus Esprit in 1981 with For Your Eyes Only, although it did little other than blow up when some bad guy tried to get into it, and Bond seemed to spend more of his time being chased in a Citroën 2CV. For petrolheads, Bond films seem to be losing the plot. Lotus fans got a tantalising glimpse of the future with the Lotus Aetna concept car at the Birmingham Motor Show in 1984. The Aetna was designed to take Lotus's new V8 engine and was 3 inches longer than the Esprit. It never made it past a concept, with Lotus lurching from one financial crisis to another, although in 2006 the current owner, Olaf Glacius, managed to turn it into a drivable car. By this time Lotus had been sold. Owners and part owners since then have been wide and varied. British car auctions, Toyota, General Motors, ACBN Holdings, who also owned Bugatti, Proton, JCB, the people that make diggers, and present owners Geely. Lotus had been passed around more than a collection plate on Sunday. In 1986, the engine got a further small boost with the help of fuel injection and an increase in the compression ratio. This helped in particular with the US market, where Lotus had been selling a lower powered version of the engine due to emissions restrictions. The air conditioning system got a boost to help with the California summers, and those seats again got a little wider and finally reclined. Lotus continued their fashion of putting decals on the car, shouting about its latest features, but it cheapened the car somewhat by making this supercar look like a cheap Escort XR3i hot hatch. Car journalists loved the classic looks, but despite the performance boost, it was being beaten by less expensive cars. But thanks to new ownership by General Motors, Lotus was beavering away on another Esprit upgrade, the X180 project. This was the first restyle of the 1975 design. That angular folded paper shape was softened by Peter Stevens, a designer who would go on to make the McLaren F1. It was a subtle change, but a necessary one, as the sharp lines of the original were out of fashion by the late 1980s. The roof section could be removed and stowed, giving the car a targa top. The fiberglass body was strengthened with a new resin injection process and with Kevlar in places. The underside was redesigned to allow air to cool the engine and brakes. Inside the cockpit, the heating and ventilation system was improved, something sorely needed. Production of the Citroën gearbox was likely ending, so Lotus sourced a replacement from the Renault 25. With General Motors helping to distribute the car in the USA, sales at last bloomed, selling over 1,000 in 1988. GM's involvement also brought access to their suppliers, and the Bosch fuel injection was swapped out for a superior Delco part. That, combined with the intercooling on the turbo, brought the output up to an amazing 264 brake horsepower, a 0 to 60 time of 4.7 seconds, and a top speed of 160 miles an hour. This was the largest power output per litre of any engine at that time. Who needed a V8 when this 2.2 litre 4-cylinder powerhouse could produce this level of performance? Italy had a high tax on engines over 2 litres, so Lotus brought out a special 2-litre Italian variant to entice customers away from their Ferraris. This version would eventually be extended to other countries. 1990 brought ABS for the first time, a rear spoiler and a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty. The cynical might think that the sudden price increase around this time was done to pay for all the warranty repairs Lotus knew they'd be making. Although sales were healthy in the late 1980s, by the early 90s they dropped again with the onslaught of new cars like the Honda Acura NSX. By now, the Esprit was the only Lotus being made. Lotus took it racing in the US SUPERCAR championships where it cleaned up, before effectively being banned in 1993 by them applying a £300 weight penalty to the car. A road-going version was sold first as the X180R, then as the Sport 300, producing enough power to get the car to 168 miles an hour. 1993 brought another small body refresh as the Series 4. With the addition of power steering, owners didn't get an upper body workout every time they drove the car. The taillights now came from the Toyota AE86, and in 1994 the engine was uprated yet again. The Lotus engineers kept finding innovative ways of wringing more power out of their amazing tiny engine. It took until 1996 to answer the question why the backbone chassis had been modified 16 years earlier. Lotus finally released their Type 918 V8 engine with 2 turbos but no intercooler. The engine was capable of 500 brake horsepower but was detuned to 350 to prevent it obliterating the gearbox. The car now got to 60 in 4.4 seconds with a top speed of 175 miles an hour. The car got another small restyle in 2002 using the round rear lights from the Lotus Elise, but despite the V8 engine, the car was looking long in the tooth and sales never took off. In the end, the low supply of Renault gearboxes ended production in 2004 after 28 years and over 10,000 cars. Lotus launched an Esprit concept at the Paris Motor Show in 2010 with a 5-litre V8 engine. The car had been in the works since 2006 and was slated for a 2014 production date. However, in 2014, Lotus cancelled the project due to a lack of finances. If you like these videos and want to get early access to new videos or appear in the credits like these fine people, consider supporting me using the Patreon link below and hit the subscribe button to get notified of new videos. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.